The brass bell above the heavy oak door of Miller's hearth and oven chimed with a crisp, welcoming melody, cutting through the low hum of the morning ovens. It was 6 a.m. on a crisp autumn Tuesday, and 38-year-old Daniel Miller stood behind the flour-dusted counter, tying the strings of his faded canvas apron. The air was thick with the rich, comforting aromas of melting butter, caramelized brown sugar, and freshly ground espresso beans. To anyone walking past the sun-bleached storefront on Maple Street, this quaint, independent bakery looked like a dream come true. But to Daniel, it was something far more sacred, a battlefield fortress built on sweat, sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to let life break him. For years ago, Daniel's world had completely imploded. Up until that fateful November morning, he had been a senior logistics director at Apex Global Logistics, pulling in a six-figure salary, living in a comfortable suburban home, and watching his then 5-year-old daughter, Maya, grow up surrounded by stability. Then came the corporate buyout. A ruthless new chief executive officer, Richard Sterling, a man known in financial circles as the Scalpel for his merciless workforce downsizing, took over Apex. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Daniel was summoned to the executive suite. Richard Sterling didn't even look up from his tablet when he delivered the verdict. "Your department is redundant, Daniel. We're automating your logistics pipeline," Richard had said coldly, his voice dripping with absolute corporate indifference. "You've got 20 minutes to clear your desk. Don't take it personally, it's just basic arithmetic." When Daniel tried to speak up, mentioning his 10 years of loyal service and his wife's ongoing medical treatments, Richard simply waved a dismissive hand toward the security guard standing by the door. That single afternoon destroyed Daniel's life. Within 6 months, medical bills piled up, his wife lost her long battle with illness, and Daniel was forced to foreclose on their home. He spent the next 3 years working 70 hours a week, driving rideshares by day and stocking grocery shelves by night, just to keep a roof over Maya's head and food on the table. Every aching muscle, every sleepless night, and every dollar saved was channeled into a single, desperate obsession: buying the abandoned, dilapidated brick bakery on Maple Street that had sat vacant for a decade, breathing life back into his grandmother's old recipes, and creating a stable future for his daughter. Now, Maya was 9 years old, a bright, resilient fourth grader who loved helping her dad frost cinnamon rolls before heading off to school. The bakery was finally turning a modest profit, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt the crushing weight on his chest lift just a fraction. "Dad," Maya called out from the back prep room, poking her head through the swinging door with a flour-smudged nose. "Is the sourdough proofing okay?" Daniel smiled, stepping away from the counter to wipe his hands on his apron. "It's resting just right, kiddo. Go grab your backpack, the school bus will be at the corner in 10 minutes. As Maya darted upstairs to grab her coat, the brass bell chimed once more. Daniel turned back toward the front counter, wiping down the glass showcase with a damp cloth. "Good morning. Welcome to Miller's Hearth," he said warmly, his eyes fixed on the display shelves. "I'll take a black coffee. Large. And whatever pastry has the least amount of sugar you sell." The voice hit Daniel like a physical blow. It was crisp, authoritative, clipped, and possessed an arrogant, icy cadence that Daniel hadn't heard in 4 agonizing years. Daniel froze. Slowly, he lifted his gaze from the counter. Standing on the other side of the glass was Richard Sterling. The billionaire CEO looked remarkably unchanged, yet subtly altered. He still wore a bespoke charcoal gray Brioni suit that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, but the sharp edges of his demeanor seemed frayed. Deep, dark circles bruised the skin beneath Richard's eyes, his hair was heavily flecked with silver, and his posture lacked the untouchable swagger Daniel remembered from that dreaded executive suite. He looked like a man carrying a mountain of invisible grief. Richard was staring intently at his smartphone, tapping aggressively at the screen, completely absorbed in his own corporate world. He hadn't even bothered to look up at the person behind the counter. For 3 terrifying seconds, every dark memory rushed back into Daniel's mind. He remembered the humiliation of being escorted out by security, the stack of rejection letters, the freezing nights in his car, and the hospital bills he couldn't pay. His fingers curled tightly into fists against the edge of the wooden counter. Every instinct screamed at him to throw a cup of hot coffee across the room, to scream in Richard's face, to make the billionaire feel even a fraction of the agony he had caused. "Are you deaf, man?" Richard barked impatiently, finally looking up from his phone. "I said, a black coffee and a low-sugar muffin. I'm on a tight schedule." Richard stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes locked onto Daniel's face. The harsh fluorescent lights of the bakery flickered slightly. Richard blinked once, twice, his sharp CEO brain frantically digging through years of corporate files, trying to place the face behind the flour-dusted apron. Then, realization struck like lightning. The color drained entirely from Richard's face. His mouth parted slightly, and his phone slipped an inch in his grip. "Daniel. Daniel Miller," he whispered, the confident authority vanishing from his voice, replaced by sudden, suffocating shock. "The one and only, Mr. Sterling," Daniel said, his voice terrifyingly calm, devoid of anger, yet carrying an immense, unshakable weight. "Though I suppose you're used to seeing me across a mahogany desk rather than a pastry counter." Richard stared at him, utterly paralyzed. He looked around the warm, rustic bakery, at the chalkboard menu, the framed family photos on the brick wall, and the rich smell of baking bread. The billionaire swallowed hard, his throat dry. You own this place?" Richard asked, his voice cracking slightly. "I do," Daniel replied evenly. "Built it from the ashes of the life your basic arithmetic burned down 4 years ago." A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the bakery. Richard looked away, his shoulders slumping visibly. The cold, untouchable titan of industry seemed to shrink right before Daniel's eyes. For a long moment, Richard didn't say a word. He just stared down at the polished wood of the counter, his hands trembling slightly as he folded them together. I suppose you have every right to throw me out," Richard muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the pastry warmer. "Or worse. Spit in my coffee." Daniel watched him closely. He had spent years imagining this exact confrontation, imagining himself spitting venom, demanding an apology, or basking in the billionaire's ruin. But looking at Richard now, Daniel didn't see a ruthless monster. He saw a broken, hollow man. Before Daniel could respond, the kitchen door swung open, and Maya trotted out, wearing her bright yellow backpack and holding her lunchbox. "Dad, I'm heading out. Mr. Henderson is waiting at the corner bus stop," Maya called out cheerfully. Then, she noticed the customer standing at the counter and paused, offering a polite, sunny smile. "Good morning, sir." Richard looked down at the 9-year-old girl. His eyes widened, glistening with sudden, unshed tears. He stared at Maya's bright, joyful smile, then slowly shifted his gaze back to Daniel. The contrast between Daniel's hard-earned peace and Richard's utter emptiness was staggering. Is this your daughter?" Richard asked, his voice shaking violently. "She is," Daniel said, stepping protectively half an inch closer to Maya. Richard lowered his head, pressing his palms against the edge of the counter as a ragged, defeated sigh escaped his lips. "You won, Daniel," the billionaire choked out, a tear finally spilling over his cheek and landing on the glass showcase. "You actually won. You built a life. You built a home." Daniel frowned, sensing the profound agony beneath the billionaire's words. "What are you talking about, Richard? You're still running Apex. You've got billions. Money?" Richard let out a hollow, bitter laugh that sounded like a sob. "Money couldn't save my son, Daniel. Last year, leukemia took my 12-year-old boy, Leo. My wife left me 6 months later because I was too busy closing corporate mergers to notice our family dissolving. And last week, the board voted me out of my own company. They called me redundant. They told me I didn't fit the new algorithmic vision of the firm." Daniel stood completely still. The universe, in its own brutal, poetic way, had brought full circle the exact cruelty Richard had handed out 4 years ago. The wheel of life had turned, leaving the billionaire stripped of everything that truly mattered. For a long, agonizing minute, the past, with all its pain, ambition, and cruelty, hung in the air between them. Daniel looked at the man who had ruined his life. He could have smiled. He could have quoted Richard's exact words back to him, "Don't take it personally, it's just basic arithmetic." Instead, Daniel felt something entirely unexpected bloom in his chest, profound, healing pity. Daniel reached down, pulled a fresh, warm chocolate chip cookie out of the display case, the very recipe he and Maya baked together every Sunday, and slid it across the counter toward Richard, right next to a steaming cup of black coffee. "It's on the house," Daniel said softly. Richard stared at the cookie, stunned. He looked up at Daniel, his eyes swimming with disbelief. "After everything I did to you, you're giving me this?" "You came in here asking for something to get you through the morning," Daniel replied, his voice steady and full of grace. "We all bleed the same blood, Richard. I lost everything once, too. I know what it feels like to stand in the ashes." Richard's lower lip quivered. The cold, ruthless titan of corporate America picked up the warm cookie, completely broken, and wept openly in the middle of a quiet bakery on Maple Street. Daniel turned to his daughter, smiling gently. "Go on to the bus, sweetie. I'll be right here." As Maya waved goodbye and stepped out into the morning sun, Daniel stood tall behind his counter. He had lost a high-paying job, a house, and a comfortable life years ago. But in losing all of that, he had discovered something infinitely more valuable: resilience, empathy, and the unbreakable strength of a father's heart.